Thank you, Chairman. Admiral, appreciate your being here and for your willingness to take on this position. And you are a nominee for this very important position, as has been outlined today, with the failures that we have seen, that the American people can expect so much better from TSA. And so I appreciate your willingness to take this on. And as you've heard all of this testimony yesterday before this committee, both in open and classified setting, what would you prioritize as the first thing that you're going to do if you're confirmed for this position?
Well, thanks, Senator. I think that, as you know, Secretary Johnson laid out a pretty clear set of directions to address the immediate challenges, and I think that my first priority is to ensure that those are carried out, that the answers that he's demanded are found, but more importantly, that they're extended as necessary to address the immediate crisis. That's the most important thing right now, to restore confidence in the system to the extent possible, to close the gaps and to mitigate the vulnerabilities to the extent possible, but then more importantly, to look systemically across the organization to see how much will it take to do this over time. Some of these things can be fixed right away, and some of these things are going to take some time to fix.
Let me ask you to the testimony we heard yesterday that was quite disturbing with respect to the 73 airport workers that the IG found links to terrorism, and then we were told that in fact TSA was not fully vetting those employees against all the information that the FBI had in terms of those that we might have based on intelligence on our terror watch list. And so here's the question that I have for you. When I heard it yesterday before the committee, I heard, yes, we identified this problem in 2014, but then we went over to the FBI and asked for information. And here we are in 2015, when we think about something that urgent, that there wasn't an immediate fix to that. It's pretty disturbing. And so what I would ask of you is this committee and our oversight function, you find something like that, that you don't wait for the bureaucracy to answer, that you let us know, and that we make sure that a fix like that is so obvious and so immediate, so that we don't have 73 airport workers with ties to terrorism, that we find right away, that we're vetting people fully, that we fix something that is so obvious immediately, and don't let the bureaucracy bog us down. Will you commit to us that if you find something like that, you're not waiting for an answer from some other agency, but in fact you will engage us to help you be effective in protecting the American public?
Yeah. Senator, I couldn't agree with you more on that issue. Absolutely. If there are legislative fixes that need to be there, I will be the first one to come back to Congress and request those fixes. In the meantime, if confirmed, the first thing I'm going to do is ensure that we're connected to all of those databases. As a member of the intelligence community now, as a full member, I understand the importance of connection. And in fact, as we said earlier, that was one of the key findings out of the 9/11 Commission report.
9/11 was all about connection and communication,
yes,
and knowing the information and sharing it with each other.
Right. No, so I'm in full agreement with you and absolutely commit to that.
Well, I appreciate that, and I would say that you take on this very important task of leadership right now, that understand this committee is very committed to having your back. If you find things that need to be fixed right away, if you find things that are wrong, that you need legislation, you need us to say to the administration, this has to be a priority. We want to work with you to make sure that we get this right. And one thing that I wanted to ask about as well, we yesterday had testimony before our committee from whistleblowers, and I think they were compelling, but clearly what they went through individually to be able to tell their story is something that we don't want to have happen in an agency where we have a culture where if you bring forward bad information, that you're either punished or you're swept aside. So I would like a commitment from you that as you engage with the employees in the organization and you have those that come forward as whistleblowers or with information as to deficiencies in the agency, that you will fully support them and make sure that they have the support so that we can make sure that we understand all the problems and can address them.
I do commit to that, Senator. I believe strongly in listening to your workforce. I believe in finding mechanisms for workforce to to express their concerns with problems. If they see a problem, I want to hear about it. And I will tell you, if they don't feel that there's any other way than to go outside the organization to provide that information, that's still important to get that information. And I don't believe that there should be any punishment against an individual who finds that. Because again, I go back to, these are people who raised their hand and took an oath. And they're finding something, and if it takes a lot of courage to speak out, and it takes a lot of courage to go outside your organization to do it. We should commend them for the courage, we should listen to what it says, and then we shouldn't be afraid to tackle the challenges.
I was glad to hear you say, in answer to Senator Ernst, that you think that in terms of pre-check, we need to ensure a fully vetted program. I think that's a priority. And also the other issue I would ask you to look at is the CITA badge issue, because that issue has popped up in other contexts where we know those badges behind the scenes, the access that is given with one of those badges in the airport, and that in fact the system is one where the airports are controlling that, but we can't account for where all the badges are. So I would ask you to take a very careful look at those badges to make sure we're not giving people access that we shouldn't be.
I will do that.
Thank you. And one final thing that I would say is the other thing that I took from the testimony yesterday, and both classified and unclassified, was we've seen that there are many SOPs, as Director Roaring mentioned, but there seems a disconnect in consistent application of those SOPs. So looking at whether it's a checklist or more consistent application of SOPs, because it only takes, as you know, Admiral, one instance of an SOP not being followed in terms of the checks that need to be in place to protect the country to allow a terrorist through. So I think, wanted to get your perspective on that and what you think we should be doing to make sure there's consistency.
Well, that's a great question, and that's fundamental to how people perform their mission. And so, as you know, in the military, it's all about standard operating procedures, and the reason you do that is so that you can ensure that you're focused on the mission. And of course, those get refined over time. It's important, first of all, that they be straightforward, clear, and understandable, that you have a consistent way of training to those standards, whether that be through resident training or through teams that train individual teams or individual units. And then there has to be an oversight function, too. You have to have a way to determine whether those standards are being adhered to. And so, again, in the Coast Guard, my experience has been you have standardization teams, we just call them stand teams, and these are standardization teams that then go around and they test that people are living up to the standards. It can be up to and including things like the Inspector General or others have done, but sometimes it's usually just a matter of walking people through the procedures and say, all right, you're going to confront this situation. What's the procedure and how do you do that? And again, checklists can help. Those are very important where a checklist is appropriate. But it's also an understanding of the process that you're trying to, again, you focus on the mission and you say, what do I need to do to accomplish that mission? What are the standards that I need to have in place to do that? What's the process for doing that? And what parts of that can be done in a checklist fashion? And then how do I ensure that it's being done? And then I go back and do that whole process over again. So I concur with you, and I think that it's important to look at the current SOPs. Are they appropriate? Listen to the people that are using them. How effective are they? Hey, from your perspective, can you understand what you're reading? And if you can understand what you're reading, does it make sense to you? Or are you seeing things that we ought to add that we're not doing? The other thing that I've discovered over time is that you can become a slave to your standard operating procedures and not be aware of what's actually, what the real process is. So you have to be careful not to just go through the motions. You have to have a thinking population that says, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense. And we get that all the time in the military. Somebody will say, why in the world are we doing X? And you ask, and you look at it and you go, I have no idea why we're doing that. It doesn't make any sense. Let's do something else.
Thank you.
Yeah.